So today I wanted to pop two big myths, the two big statistics that are used in finance, one being GDP and the other being inflation. So GDP is basically the sum of transactions in an economy. So that means if you've got a house that's worth $1 million and you sell it for 2 million, so that would be GDP growth of 100%. Let's say that was the entire economy. Now, you would say, okay, that's good. So it was 1 million and went to 2 million. That's pretty good. But what happens if that was only due to inflation? Just due to printing money? Would that be really 100% of GDP growth? Obviously it wouldn't. So you would have to make it real GDP. Real GDP subtracts the inflation rate from those transactions of the economy, and then you get the supposedly real increase in wealth in that economy. So let's say GDP inflation was 50%, and again the house went from 1 million to 2 million. You would only have 50% GDP growth, and the other 50% would be due to inflation. Now the problem is, what do you want to do? You want to increase your GDP, and therefore how can you do it? Just make a fake inflation rate, which is what they do. So let's give you an inflation statistic, how they measure inflation. Mobile phones just released the iPhone 14. Price rises every country in the world for the iPhone 14 compared to 13, except for in the US. But according to inflation, it's gone down in price. What do you mean? Well, the answer is they measure mobile phone based on how many megabytes, how much the value of megabyte storage is available for that phone. So if you went from a 60 megabyte phone for $1,000 to a 120 megabyte phone for $1,200, that would be a decrease in inflation. That's what they will tell you. Even though it doesn't matter, you are going to the shop, there's only really one phone you can buy there when you go to the iPhone store, right? There's the iPhone 14. Oh, there's probably actually the iPhone 13. That's about it, right? You have no option to buy the 30 megabyte option or the 60 megabyte option. There is no possibility of doing that nowadays. But according to inflation statistics, they don't care. They just go by how much a megabyte of storage is valued. Now, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you go with how many megapixels you have on your camera, or how many emojis are available? Why would you pick storage capacity? That makes zero, so arbitrary. They pick these things rather than just going, an iPhone last year, well, they were the highest iPhone was the iPhone 13. This year it's iPhone 14. They're the same thing. Essentially, they're the top iPhone. That's the number one thing that's being bought, and therefore we're going to compare that. No, they won't do that. They will always try and show deflation. And so therefore, when you take these fake inflation statistics, and we are talking again about CPI in the UK is 10%, and they go, wow, that's highest in 40 years, but not as high as 40 years ago. But 40 years ago, they were using RPI. RPI nowadays is 14%. And that would make it even higher than 40 years ago. So if we're comparing apples to apples, we have the highest inflation, I don't know, 60, 70 years, I don't even know, right? But they don't do that. They compare apples to oranges. RPI in the 80s, CPI now, CPI slightly less, and that's what they do. It is mind-boggling that no one picks up on this and no one talks about this. It just parrot out the same stupid sound bites. Anyway, so we've got this purposefully lowered inflation. What will that do to your GDP figures? So again, our example of the house, inflation is 50%, but they're going to go, no. Inflation is not really 50%. We're going to use CPI in this fake thing. 25% is inflation. What would then GDP growth be? It would be 75% in our example, right? The 100% increase in house price, 25% would be inflation, and 75% would be the GDP growth. And that's what they do it. And that's why you had the US Q3 GDP figure come out nicely and positive, quite after two quarters of negative growth, which I was shocked about, because even with a fake CPI stat, they still managed to get negative growth. That's pretty impressive. But yeah, so now it's positive and everything looking lovely. I'm telling you, it's not. So the final thing I want to discuss is what GDP is also meaningless, and I'll explain to you like this. It measures the value of goods and service in an economy. So let's take the UK, which is quite cheap, not as cheap as America, but quite cheap, and Israel. Oh, Israel, everything is expensive. It is the biggest rip-off country. There is nothing cheap other than wine, funnily enough. There is nothing cheap in Israel, right? Everything is expensive. Now, looking at GDP per capita, Israel is far higher than the UK. UK is $47,000 per person, and Israel is $53,000 per person. So you would say the Israelis are richer. I'm afraid not, because what is that based on? That's based on the value of things in that country. So if in the UK a fork is $1, a knife is $1, and a spoon is $1, in Israel a fork is $3. So in England you get 3 things for that $3. In Israel you just get 1. Let's make it $4, right? If you get 3 things for $3, here it's $4 for 1 fork. But it will show GDP in Israel is so much higher. Yeah, but the standard of living is way lower because they're paying $4 for a fork. In the UK, you get 3 things for $3. So that's why GDP is a really terrible measure of wealth, because the UK people can be, have lots of stuff and houses and cars and everything, but less valuable in dollar worth. But the Israelis have barely, starving with their 1 fork and a bicycle, and they're richer in theory, but they can't actually do anything with that money. So as we see, everything, you have to look at things with a different eye and see how things are measured and the lies that pervade. We can clearly see a drop in living standards everywhere across the globe, wherever you are, in whatever country. It's very clear, and they can lie and put out lying statistics all they want. I think we can all see it. We do need a great reset. Sadly, not the way that they want to do it. And they will continue lying with their fake statistics.